The Treaty of Versailles was pivotal in world history, marking an unprecedented low point for Germany. In the previous episode, we delved into the humiliating terms of the agreement, which caused it to look like a surrender agreement for Germany. On top of taking responsibility for the outbreak of the war, Germany was also saddled with imaginary war reparations, something no other defeated nation had ever experienced. In this part, I'm going to take a close look, in a very high resolution, at the economic tragedy in Germany following the treaty. I would add that the treaty was the first seed to the rise of the Nazi Party later. We will explore the madness that prevailed in Germany during the hyperinflation period that followed the end of World War I. While I recommend watching the first part to fully appreciate the context, rest assured that this part can also be enjoyed on its own. Economic Rhapsody. Make sure to subscribe, and let's get started. Winter, 1923. Tens of thousands of infantry and armored French soldiers occupied the Ruhr region, Germany's Silicon Valley of those days. Germany couldn't fight back, as one of the treaty's sanctions required Germany to reduce its army to only up to 100,000 soldiers. As a result, taking control of the Ruhr region was a piece of cake for the French. Initially, the French believed that the Germans would work for them, and the French would take the coal and iron that the Germans produced. But the French soon realized that the Germans are resisting. It was not a military resistance, but a slowdown, or an Italian strike if you wish, which definitely did the work.
If the frog-eaters French think they can slave us just because we don't have an army, they have a huge mistake.
The Germans simply refused to work, causing the industrial center of Germany to come to a halt. The French tried everything they could think of to restart production, including bringing in their own workers to run the mines and factories. However, this did not work out as planned, and they ultimately decided to empty the factories and warehouses of their equipment, raw materials, and goods. To do so, they needed trains, but the German railway workers were also on strike, so they tried to replace them with French ones. This was delaying the French for months. Meanwhile, they began making life miserable for the German population by restricting people and goods from entering and leaving the Ruhr. They also deported many people who were identified as leaders of the rebellion and even placed Friedrich Ebert, who was serving as the president of Germany at the time, under house arrest. This was a highly unusual and controversial move, as it is generally considered a violation of diplomatic protocol to arrest or detain a foreign head of state who is currently in office. After the deportation of German officials and workers, protests erupted against the French occupation.
Resistance through work!
This was one of the common slogans they were shouting to encourage the German people. These protests quickly turned violent, and clashes between German workers and French soldiers resulted in deaths on both sides. The fact that German workers were killed in these clashes caused massive demonstrations, with the German people seeking revenge for what they saw as French aggression. In response, French soldiers also became increasingly violent, and the situation escalated into a cycle of retaliation and bloodshed. Estimations suggest that around 2,000 German civilians and 132 French soldiers were killed as part of the passive resistance movement. The loss of the Ruhr, which was Germany's main economic center, had a devastating impact on the country's economy and only made the situation worse. A good analogy to modern times would be akin to Saudi Arabia losing all of its oil reserves, which would be a catastrophic event for the Arab kingdom. This is pretty much what happened to Germany those days. The German government's solution, in addition to printing money like nuts, was to borrow money from the public by issuing bonds. But come on, what normal person would buy such bonds, knowing that the chance to see the money back is unlikely? Considering the price explosion, people knew that even if they will get their money back, with nice interest, this money will be worthless, so they better buy food and supply as long as it was worth something. To deal with the lack of buyers, the central bank began buying the bonds itself by printing more money, which only worsened the situation. The German mark, originally traded for 4 marks per dollar, continued to fall, and by November 1923, less than a year after the occupation of the Ruhr, something pretty amazing just happened. The exchange rate got to an insane level of 100,000 marks per dollar. A few months later, and the rate became literally legendary, with more than 4 trillion marks per one simple US dollar. Yes, more than 4 trillion, and it is not a mistake. Let's pause for a second just to count the zeros the number trillion contains. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 zeros. A 13 digits number. Unbelievable, right? Let's get into some proportions to let you feel what the German people felt. Take Turkey from 2018 to our days of 2023. In 2018, $1 was worth 4 Turkish liras. Today it is worth 19 liras. That's 375% devaluation in 5 years. Sounds like walking in the park when you compare it to 238 million% in 3 years, right? Now let me do a quick math for a more clear comparison.
375 divided by 5. 238 million divided by 3 equal to 79k divided by something equal to 3075.
Okay, got it. The current Turkish currency crisis is 3,075 times softer. Again, Germany had a currency crisis that was 3,075 times more severe than modern Turkey. Now please Google the catastrophic economic situation in Turkey of our days to get some perspective on this unbelievable situation in Germany. Or, subscribe to the channel and wait 20 years for this to become history, and I promise to upload an episode to explore it for you. Now, how do you think this madness impacted the inflation? Think about living in a place where the prices of basic products are doubling themselves almost every day. Yep, hard to believe, I know. I mean, the highest annual inflation rate in the USA of the third millennium was spotted on June 22nd, 9.1%. In one full year. All of us are feeling it in our pockets and our savings, no doubt. It is the biggest economic crisis since the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis at least. So in Germany, the 9% inflation rate was not annual, it was almost an hourly rate. German workers got paid twice a day. They would leave their working place in the middle of the day to buy groceries before prices rise too much. If they would get paid once a month, they won't be able to buy anything with their monthly salary, maybe a few eggs maximum. Now let's get some more perspective about prices doubling on almost a daily basis. These days, in 2023, the American Consumer Price Index, known as CPI, is double than the CPI level at some point in the past, and by past, I don't mean yesterday like it was in Germany. To be more accurate, this past day when the CPI was half of these days was in early 1995. That means the prices in the US are rising, but it took them 28 years to complete a 100% rally. So the inflation growth rate in the Weimar Republic of Germany was more than 10,000 times higher than the US in our days. The mark was so worthless that the workers arrived to work with bags, suitcases, and even carts just to have the ability to collect their salary twice a day. Most likely that the average suitcase was worth more than all the cash it could contain. Even though the mark was worthless, its value still managed to decline all the time. So if at some specific time you needed 6 kilograms of marks to buy some eggs, and yes, I stated its value in kilograms, only 5 hours later you would need 7 kilograms of marks to buy the same number of eggs. So no one wanted to keep marks and foreign currency, and even bartering had completely overtaken the German economy. People refused to accept marks in exchange for products, only accepting foreign currencies or other goods. Cigarettes became a required commodity as they became the new informal currency of Germany, the same way as you see in prison movies. The most unlucky people were those who had no choice but to receive their wages in marks, such as people working for governmental or municipal offices. Those people, with their families, suffered terrible hardship and starvation as the farmers who produced most of the food preferred to export their goods in order to get paid with foreign currency and avoided selling to German people with their worthless marks. As the Ruhr was under French occupation and the coal miners were striking, Germany was left with almost no coal at all. This shortage raised the prices of coal, and together with the worthlessness of cash marks, people found these money bills as alternative fuel options to heat their houses in the frozen German winter. Food riots erupted in the big cities, and all types of businesses were looted. Whatever could be taken from the stores was taken. The farmers who produced the food were not hungry, but they also suffered as starving people raided their villages for slaughtering and stealing their livestock. Sometimes they even broke into the farmers' homes to steal from their kitchens and consumed their anger on the rest of the house. Germany found itself in a civil catastrophe. No more united proud German people, fighting for a cause and supporting each other in the awful times of the biggest war in history, right to those days. The German people became divided and full of hate, and that brought many clashes between extreme political sides such as extreme right, communists, etc. And it didn't end with just political polarization and conflicts between supporters of several different approaches and parties. The inflation crisis had a varied impact on different groups of people. While some individuals were able to reap the benefits of the situation, others had to be more strategic to maintain their financial stability. Two groups that were able to profit from the inflation crisis were farmers and factory owners who could produce goods of value and sell them abroad for foreign currency. Those who owned tangible assets were largely unaffected by inflation and could maintain or increase their wealth. Another group that was able to weather the crisis was those who had invested in companies listed on the stock market. Although it was challenging for factories to operate in such an inflationary environment, they were still able to produce goods that were highly sought after. In a hyperinflationary situation, products were often considered more valuable than money. As a result, the value of tangible assets, such as equipment and machinery, increased. The debts that factories had incurred also became insignificant in comparison to the value of the assets purchased with those loans. Therefore, the factories were able to pay off their debts with ease, and those who had invested in them were able to preserve the value of their money and even make a profit. On the other hand, the working class was not as fortunate. Although most workers were able to maintain their wages throughout the inflationary period, the value of their wages did decrease in real terms. The cost of living skyrocketed, and workers had to pay more for everyday goods and services. However, workers were able to negotiate their wages to be tied to a stable currency, such as the dollar or pound sterling. This allowed them to maintain their standard of living by selling their labor at a fair price that reflected the rising costs of services and goods. Those who got hit the hardest by this economic disaster were old retired people, widows, orphans, students, and many others who relied on fixed incomes. They saved money for years, only to see their life savings turn into pennies almost overnight. Doesn't sound like big fun, I guess. Germany blamed the crazy reparations it had to pay for the crisis. Hitler himself claimed that they were robbing the country. But let's be real here, the Treaty of Versailles wasn't the sole cause of hyperinflation. The war had already weakened the economy, and the government's decision to print more money to finance its spending only made things worse. On top of that, international factors like the gold standard and the U.S. Federal Reserve's decision to raise interest rates in 1928 played a role in exacerbating the crisis. So, while the Treaty of Versailles played a significant role in Germany's hyperinflation, it probably wasn't the only cause. It's a complex economic disaster that teaches us about the dangers of printing money, the impact of wars on economies, and the importance of managing debt. Thanks for watching Economic Rhapsody. I hope you learned some new things about this well-known economic event from history. Please don't forget to subscribe to get notified about the next economic event that I'm going to explore here. Feel free to comment with fact-fixing, theories, suggestions, and ideas for the third part of this episode or other economic historical events you'd like me to explore for you. Oh, and one last thing, please subscribe, like, and share to support the channel, and I promise to provide you with many more fascinating explorations of economic events from history. Economic Rhapsody. See you soon.